When I talk to business owners about employee compliance and payroll, the words I most often hear back from them are things like complicated or expensive or stressful or legal or scary. So HR and payroll and employee compliance are all together in one big giant pot. So if we want to talk about payroll and employee compliance, it also goes under the word HR. So HR, human resources, HR is complicated, let's face it. And every year it's becoming more and more challenging for business owners. So businesses know this and they're investing more money. They're investing more in HR because they're worried about all the new regulations, all the enforcement activities against them, the personal liability because they're personally liable for a lot of this stuff. And the corporation, the corporate shield doesn't protect them against all this. So they're personally on the hook for some of this. And that really concerns them. And there's also the risk of being sued by your own employees. And that happens more and more often now, especially with the internet and the employees having access to all this information. It's easy for the employees to do their own research and then use it against the employer. So it's a big issue today. Employee compliance, HR, payroll, much bigger than it used to be 20, 30 years ago. So I almost liken it to like the surface of the moon. It's just a minefield that every step you go, you could step into something that's really a problem, and it's a big problem. So it's really scary for employers. And when they come back to me with these words, it's for a reason. And a lot of them have heard all these war stories from their friends that own businesses about bad things that happened to them. Either the employees sued them or Department of Labor came after them. So there's lots of issues, lots of concerns, and they're all valid. They're absolutely valid.
So, as a somebody that is starting a new business, what would be the first step for them to understand payroll and employee compliance?
I think the first step for them is to just try to be knowledgeable about whether they're in compliance. Is their company in compliance? Are they in full compliance or are they at risk? And the other issue, if you did get sued by an employee or you got investigated by the Department of Labor, besides the money that you'd have to pay, how much time is going to be robbed from you to deal with this? How much of a distraction is this going to be to your business? How many sleepless nights are you going to have trying to figure out how you're going to overcome this? So it's like any other lawsuit. If you're the defendant in a lawsuit, it consumes you, it distracts you. You can't even do anything else. So you want to avoid that at all costs. So I would be aware of the top five areas relating to employee compliance that business owners get in trouble with. And the first one is paying employees off the clock, paying them cash, paying them off the books. So that's number one. Number two is not doing overtime calculations correctly and not paying people overtime correctly. So that's the second one. The third one, not accounting for meals and breaks. So you have to account for those things. Employees are entitled to meal breaks. They're entitled to breaks if they're in certain types of work environments like manufacturing. But you need to somehow be able to prove that the employees got meal breaks and their breaks if they're entitled to regular breaks. The fourth thing is treating exempt versus non exempt employees properly and classifying them correctly. So most people don't even know what that means. What's an exempt employee? What's a non-exempt employee? So basically, an exempt employee is exempt from overtime, and a non-exempt employee is not exempt from overtime, and you must pay them overtime. So some people think that, oh, I could pay everybody a salary, but that's not the case. Some employees you're required to pay hourly because they are not exempt from overtime, non-exempt, and you need to keep track of their hours and you need to pay them time and a half after 40 hours or whatever the laws are in your state. And the fifth thing that business owners get in trouble with is they try to pay employees as independent contractors. They try to pay people as 1099s off the books, so to speak, not on payroll, don't withhold any taxes. So that's it. So just to recap, one, off the clock work time. You got to pay people on the books. Two, overtime calculations, messing that up. Three, meals and breaks. You got to make sure you're accounting for the meals and the breaks and you're documenting it. Four, classifying employees correctly as exempt from overtime or not exempt from overtime. And the fifth thing is correctly classifying employees as employees and not as independent contractors. So these are the big five audit areas. I want to tell you this because most business owners have no idea. They're shocked when I tell them there's actually two departments of labor. There's the federal Department of Labor, and then there's your state Department of Labor. So in your own hometown where your business is, there's two departments of labor itching to get at your money and itching to defend your employees' rights. So you got two agencies after you. And just to talk about the federal one for a minute, the federal one is a cabinet department of the US government that reports directly to the president of the United States. That's how important it is. They have a budget of billions of dollars, 13, 14 billion dollars, and they have over 17,000 full-time equivalent employees going after you. So this is a big enforcement arm, and it's something that is devastating when they come after you because it's the federal government. There's also the state. So the state has different rules than the federal, and it's very confusing. What if the federal rule is not as strong as your specific state rule? Then you have to follow the state rule. But it's just a nightmare. And it's very hard for business owners to focus on this and to do this all by themselves. So you really need some help. And then there's two things I like to say about this. There's getting help before the bad stuff happens and getting help after the bad stuff happens. So before the bad stuff happens, it's proactive. And you can actually get an HR professional or have somebody advising you that's not very expensive. Whereas once the bad stuff happens, and either you're getting sued by an employee or the Department of Labor is after you, then you must hire an attorney or a team of attorneys. And that gets to be ridiculously expensive. So, my advice to all business owners is to get some HR assistance beforehand, put some main things in place. The two biggest things I recommend are an employee handbook and job descriptions. And the job description should clearly identify, based on the work that this person is doing, whether that job is exempt from overtime or non exempt from overtime. And those are like the two most important things that a business owner can do proactively to prevent a lot of this audit and expense and pressure and scariness and complicated and legal and all those words.
So somebody that is a new business owner that wants to put together an employee handbook, where would they go to learn how to do that?
So that's a good question. A lot of people go to attorneys to do it, and the attorneys charge an arm and a leg, and it's not really necessary because, again, it's a proactive thing. And you really only need the labor attorneys after the bad stuff happens. So, you could go to your local SHRM chapter, Society of Human Resource Managers, try to reach out. Also, your payroll provider should be able to assist you with some sort of valuable HR services to be able to help you create a handbook. But the most important thing is not just having a handbook, you have to distribute it to the employees, and you need to have an acknowledgement or receipt that your employees received it, a signed acknowledgement or receipt. So without that signed acknowledgement of the receipt, you could never prove they knew about these rules, regulations. So you must have something signed, and you must be able to produce that years later if you need to.
Say that somebody has the employee handbook or they don't really know what to do with it, they don't give it to their employees, and then what kind of situation like would happen for them to get in trouble? Like say if the employee is working overtime and they feel like they deserve it, or like what why is the employee handbook so important?
A lot of the times it's important for things that are specifically company policies. So, for example, there's no federal law saying you have to pay people paid time off, vacation, sick, personal, or even holiday pay. However, let's say an employee gets fired and they
Mm.
had this whole bank of vacation time that they didn't use. How is that handled? What's the policy as far as that bank? Does it get paid out upon termination? Do they lose it? So the manual could dictate how that gets handled. But more importantly than the manual is if the manual says that they lose it and they don't get their pay for vacation or something once they're terminated. However, in the past, the employer has paid out other employees, then that action by them of paying out employees sets the precedent, and that overrules what was written in the handbook.
Yeah.
So it's not just the written word, it's what's the practice. What are they actually doing that's going to dictate what the policies really are? So,
Wow. Yeah, so that's interesting, especially if you were to think legally, wouldn't something be written be more important than what they've been doing? But no, apparently not.
yeah.
Okay, interesting. So how does the DOL catch you?
Huh. So, believe it or not, they catch you because your employees turn you in. That's what they do. And most business owners have no idea about this either, but Department of Labor actually has an app, free app that the employees could download. And what do they do in the app? They can actually record their time. They can clock in, clock out, and record their hours. And then they can, at the end of the week, they can hit a button on the app and it automatically puts the employer to the Department of Labor. So now the Department of Labor has a complaint and has the hours that the employee stated they work. Weeks later, when the Department of Labor inquires, either by mail or they knock on your door, they're going to ask you for time records for that worker on that week. And the employer is going to say, time records? I don't have time records. That person's a salaried person. They get paid the same every week. Well, maybe that's a mistake. Maybe they should be an hourly person. And even if they are salaried, do you have records of the hours that the employees worked? No. Do you have proof that they took a meal break? Probably not. So, in any event, the Department of Labor, because it's really a profit center for the federal government, once they come knocking, they're going to get you for something. They really are. It's just a matter of how big and how much. And when they come for the one employee, that reported them, they're not just looking at the one employee. They're going to start looking at every employee. So this thing opens up a whole can of worms and it becomes very problematic. But to answer your question, most often employers get turned in by their own employees, disgruntled employee, and they often get turned in by the app that the employees download and document and use to report the employer.
Yeah, I had no idea that there was an app. That's terrifying for
Mhm.
somebody that's a business owner. Oh my gosh. What is the difference between the DOL audit and a DOL investigation?
That's a really good question. Essentially, an audit implies a more narrowly tailored review of documents. So it's narrow. They're going after one thing, let's say. Whereas an investigation implies a much broader reach, including site visits to review documents. It includes interviews with your employees and managers. So it's a much broader, it's a fishing expedition, basically, whereas an audit is going after one particular issue.
What does the actual audit process look like for an employer?
So for most employers, it follows the same steps. So the first thing that an employer can expect is they'll get an audit notification letter explaining what the audit plan is and the scope. So they'll get something in the mail and it'll notify them that there's an audit happening. So that's when you need to call your attorney, all right, when you get one of those letters. Then the second step is the Department of Labor will formally request documents from you. And what if you can't produce these documents? What if they're from years ago and you can't find them? Don't worry. The Department of Labor will just believe your employee's statements. Whatever the employee says, if you can't dispute it, they'll just believe the employee and bill you for it. So without having documents, you have no leg to stand on. Then typically the third step in the process is a face to face meeting. And they call it a conference because there are so many people, including the large defense team that you're going to need to protect yourself. They call it a conference face to face. That's typically the next step. Then the fourth step typically is Department of Labor's finding discussion with your defense team. So that's when they're going to tell your attorneys what they found. And that's your chance to negotiate a little bit. All right. So that at that point, it's a negotiation. Then the fifth step is the audit report notifies you of the conclusions, which typically are not good. And they assess penalties and this could be much more money than you have in the bank. So you're in a heap of trouble because now they're after you for back wages, they're after you for what they call double liquidated damages, which is code for twice the amount. They penalize you twice the amount. So if the finding was that you owed 30,000 in back wages, then they add double liquidated damages, which is another 30,000. So now you got to pay 60,000. And imagine if the numbers are much bigger. Imagine if the numbers were $500,000. Now you'd have to $500,000 in back wages and $500,000 in double liquidated damages. You'd owe $1 million. It's crazy. And then the last step is the exit interview. And hopefully that doesn't mean exit from your business. It's that bad. It's an exit interview. So they come in, they wreak havoc on you, your business. You have all these attorney costs, you have all this distraction, sleepless nights, headaches, worry, and then they're basically financially bankrupting you. So that's typically what the audit process looks like. It's not fun. And It's something you'd really want to avoid and be proactive about, and put yourself in at least the best position that you can, that you have documents, you produce documents, you can dispute any of these employee claims. And I think that's the best thing for you. But that's what the audit process typically looks like.
So how do most businesses get turned into the DOL?
So most of the time, it's like I said before, and most of the time it's from your employees, and it's from the free app that the Department of Labor has, that the employees can download. So a lot of times the employees sitting there on their phone, and you think they're sending a text message or checking their emails, but they're not. They're in the Department of Labor app, clocking in, clocking out, doing things like that so they can report you. It's a pretty powerful tool. It's available in multiple languages, and it's the biggest way companies get turned in. Oh, there's another thing. If you have Spanish speaking employees, after midnight on TV, on the Spanish speaking TV stations, there are employment attorneys advertising. Are you getting paid off the books? Are you not getting paid overtime? Call us. We'll help you collect tens of thousands of dollars from your employer. So basically, after midnight, these attorneys are out there advertising, trying to get your employees to call them so that they can create a lawsuit and sue you. And this happens all the time. And because most of us don't speak Spanish and we're not watching Spanish TV, and we're certainly not watching after midnight, we have no idea how many of these attorneys are on there and how hard they're pounding the pavement trying to get these employees to turn on you and collect all this money. It's terrible.
Everything that you told me makes me never want to own a business ever. So what do you, yeah,
Yeah,
what do you do? How do you avoid this? This is awful.
it really can be awful. And the best thing you can do is be aware of the laws and the regulations, um, understand what things truly cost you. For example, a lot of the times it's just a matter of how things display on the paycheck stub. So if you're paying a person a salary, a lot of times you're doing that because it's just easy. You don't have to keep track of the hours the person works, and they just get $800 every week and you're done. But in reality, if you had the right tools and you had a timekeeping system, and you paid them hourly and you tracked their time, and you paid them time and a half for overtime occasionally when they worked overtime, you might actually be spending less than the $800 at the end of the day. But you're certainly going to get more for your money because you're not just paying employees and they don't show up for work, or they leave early to go home for something personal. So my point is this: it's out of laziness, it's out of not knowing. But if you have employees, you really should have a timekeeping system and a payroll system, and you should have good documentation. So it should be electronic documents, so you can locate the documents years later and produce them when you need them, if you ever need to.
Okay, so it's really just being prepared. So previously you said basically talk to your payroll company. Is that the only way that a business can be prepared to understand all of this stuff?
A lot of times, a payroll company isn't going to provide adequate services in the realm of employee compliance. They're just going to run your payroll and that's it. And in fact, they're not even going to, a lot of them are do it yourself type payroll services these days, where you just go into their software, you say how much you want to pay somebody, and you pay them. And it's all up to you to do everything. And all they're doing is calculating the amounts, doing the direct deposit, and paying your employer taxes and employee taxes, and preparing and filing your payroll tax returns. So they're not really into the employee compliance piece. And it's especially notable that the big giant national companies like ADP and Paychex, You're calling to these giant call centers that they have all over the world. It's not even the US. So they can't keep track of the state laws. They don't know the state laws. They don't know the local laws. They don't know the intricacies in your state. So as if you have a local payroll company, then you have a chance. And maybe they offer some HR employee compliance assistance. But otherwise, you're just going to have to reach out or figure it out or hire an HR professional to try to assist you. But it's very specific. You want to be able to get HR assistance from people that are knowledgeable about your home state and your local area. I think that the biggest thing is at the end of the day, you got to protect yourself, your family, and I say your family because you're personally liable for this and they could come after your personal assets like your house. So you got to protect yourself, your family, and your company from the risk of a full-blown DOL investigation or lawsuits from your employees. And you just got to be knowledgeable and invest some money and some time being proactive because oddly enough, after the bad stuff happens and someone gets investigated by the DOL and they have one of these audits and they have to pay up all this money, then all of a sudden the light bulb goes on and they want to do everything the right way. So hopefully that's not you. Hopefully you can learn from other people's mistakes and hopefully you could be a little bit proactive. It doesn't have to cost you more money all the time. It's just a matter of how things are displayed on the paycheck stub. For example, don't give people salary that are non-exempt from overtime. You want to pay them hourly. So it could be cost you the same at the end of the week, but at least it shows hours times the rate of pay, and you have a time card to back that up. So it doesn't always have to cost you more, is my point. So just go out there and be proactive, and hopefully none of this bad stuff will ever happen to you.